welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be reviewing this book. It's called The Death of My Father the Pope. It is written by Obed Silva. It's a memoir, and he is someone that I know, and he was not a professor of mine personally, but I knew him, and he is just a great teacher, and I loved getting to know him in community college. We still keep in touch, and he wrote a book, and I was so proud of him, and that feels so weird to say, being that I was basically his student but not. But yeah, I just look up to him so much, and I don't know if he knows that. Just being a mentor and an inspiring figure, because I write as well, and I always, strive to do something like this. And even though I did write a book, it was self-published. Like, to be able to have like an actual published book and have it out there and have so many of your students be reading it and so many people relating to it, like, it's just amazing. I think going into this book, obviously I was going to read it because it was his, but I didn't know how much I was going to relate to it, being that I was a Hispanic young woman that was raised in a high-class society. My parents lived that Hispanic dream of wanting a better life for us, and thus they were born and raised in East LA, and then they moved to here, and they made sure that we did well in school, and I grew up in a pretty great way, and I think when I did move to LA, I was a little bit of an outsider, because not a lot of people understood me. I did experience struggles, but not in their way. I can't say that I relate to them in that way or could understand them in that way. And I view it from the perspective of an outsider a lot of the time, which is hard. And then living in LA, I went through my own struggles, so I was able to view that in a way where my own values were tested. And I grew up, and I figured things out, and I changed a lot, and I fell in love with the beauty of my culture, and things changed, but I also still hold beliefs and values that I developed from my childhood, and I hold them very dearly because they're part of who I am. And so I kind of felt like I had no right to love my culture as much as I do, or ended up, doing so, because I felt kind of like I was a fake, because I grew up not there. And so when I would go and hear his story, I loved it so much, and I found it so beautiful, and I couldn't relate to it, but I just viewed it through the eyes of what a beautiful story for our culture to know and hear. And even reading this book, I felt that, but I felt like a fake still. But I think once I kept reading it, and I got to the end, and there's this one passage where he's like, I am two different people. And just in reading that sentence alone, like, I didn't even know what he was going to say in the next sentence, or what the paragraph was going to be about, or how he was going to end it. But I felt so heard in that one line. And as I continued reading, I know he was talking about himself and how he views himself, and how that relates to his father, and how he chooses to be different from his father. But just the division the duality within a person is what I related to so much. This whole book is about his father and even his own struggle with alcoholism, and it was, I think, so powerful to me because it was a book about discovery and discovering yourself as a human being as well, and realizing your faults and realizing the faults of others and what also you loved about them. And it was very much like a weird coming of age story, and I really loved it with all these other things wrapped around it. Um, and overall, it was just a very heartfelt story. But I related to it because I felt that pain in not being what people expected me to be or thought me to be or wanted me to be. And so he talks about himself as being a drunk and being an alcoholic and being the drunk, the stereotypical one who is on the floor, who pees in his pants and, like, is dirty and is slurring his language, and also this college professor who dresses up nicely. And that's the image I have in my head because I know him that way. And it's just so crazy because I remember having a phone call with him and him saying, well, there are sides to us that people don't see and they don't know. And sometimes those sides are hidden behind closed doors. And I thank him so much. I thanked him so much for sharing that with me, but also I thank him so much for opening that door and letting us see that side of him and that struggle. And I think it's really raw and really emotional and really, really an important thing, and not even thinking apart from the book being about alcoholism, just about being a person, that there are many parts of us that we struggle with and try to acknowledge, and they challenge us. And which side are we going to choose? Are we both? All these different things that we stress about in an everyday situation, adding and building to that stress and anxiety and us performing in a certain way. But it's like, who are we? And I think we're just a little bit of everything, to be honest. And I think we can find a way to be proud of that, even with our faults, even with our mistakes, by growing and by acknowledging them and by having individuals who help us and care about us and love us and understand us. And so I just wanted to thank him just for that, because even though it's like, it feels like a little bit of a stretch, I think it's also a very important motif in the story. But going back, I just loved how he depicted his father as a loving individual at times, and when he was at his best, and those loving memories. I think we all have relationships with, or had relationships with individuals where there were good times, there were good memories, or we remember them as somebody or something else, and the truth came out and they don't mean that anymore, or they do, or it's kind of like it's tattered the image of who they used to be, and we're left struggling with, how do we feel about a person, what do we think about them now, and we struggle with this inner love that we have for someone that we may now sort of hate. And it's also anger that comes within us of things that we see of them in ourselves, and therefore we take out that anger on them. And it's all these different things. It's all these different things in this book, and I think it's so beautiful. Just looking at all the different struggles of a person, and not only him showing his dad as a drunk, but also as a wonderful, beautiful father whom he loved. and maybe he didn't get everything he wanted from him. Um, but there was moments that he is going to remember and treasure for the rest of his life. And I think in that there's this embedded forgiveness that I forgive you for all your mistakes because I not only need to do it for me, but I think I need to do it for you because you tried, didn't try as much as you should have or as hard as you should have, but you did try and you did give me, things that are going to help me for the rest of my life. And you did, you were my dad, and I am who I am today because of you. And I can choose not to be you and be a better version of myself, but that is also the better version of you because the better version of me also depicts and has pieces of the good that you gave me. And just like all this stuff, like, oh, I love it. I love it. And just showing all these strong individuals in his life, painting a beautiful picture of his childhood and going and crossing the border. And I just felt this book was so culturally rich. And he didn't talk too much about his time in the States. It was mainly when he was over there visiting his dad. But I appreciated that because that was a side of him and things about him that I didn't know, because I knew about his life here in the States. Like, I have read that. We've all heard that. If you have been his students and you've seen his, like, you know that about him. We know that about him. These are things that, these are the building blocks of what made this person who they are. And to know this person, know who they are. And like, I went to his reading and seeing him right in front of me, and he literally is like, he's grown since like I've known him, and things have changed about him. And I saw him go through the end of this process, because he was still drinking when I still knew him, and now he's sober. And I'm like, wow, I got to see that part of your journey, but I didn't get to see this part, and thank you for showing me this. I think people's histories and making them who they are and all the little bits and pieces that put them together are so fascinating. Him talking about his mom, and he talks about his mom with such love when he does talk about her to us. Like, it's like so much love and adoration because she's been there for him, and she loves him so much. And in this book we get to see not like everything, because he's honestly talks about her all the time because it's mainly focused on his dad, but we get to see more of like what happened when he was younger with his mom and his dad. And I only have seen pictures of his brothers and his sisters, and now like getting to put a story to those faces, I think is really great. And even if you don't know the person, like, I still think that this book paints a picture of who the individual is. He talks so much about not only his background, but him being a professor. And I think he does that more towards the end. In the beginning, he kind of starts like talking about it, but like how he got there, and he tells a little bit of a story about how he got there through studying and having his education partially really when he was in jail, and having to serve his sentence, and then the court trial that ultimately like allowed him to pursue his education even more. And now he's a professor, and he has students that look up to him, and I just he's so great. And he before him, I still wasn't sure how I felt about incarcerated individuals being set free and finishing their sentences, and how they would assimilate to everyday like society, and just seeing him and seeing the possibilities and knowing his story and how he struggled, you it paints a different picture. And so I have grown so much in my beliefs in that, and he has taught me so much. And just reading this book, I think it educates so many people about gang violence and alcoholism, and also just showing them the beauties of a Latinx culture, and what it's like to be a family member on the other side of the border when you have family on the other side and when you can't get to them, and how different it is and how assimilation affects us. And I think that was also a big part of the book of how he now was a professor who or a college student who could afford, to dress differently and have a nice car, and over there it's completely different, and they still have to work and hard to provide for their families, and how so many people have crossed the border and you know they want to provide for their families in that way, but then they don't see them anymore or don't see them as frequently. And it definitely tore these families apart, and otherwise these individuals who are now in this society that was completely different from the one they grew up in, and now were doing better for themselves, and they had family back home who were living a completely different life, and they were struggling to do things and be able to provide for themselves. And now you come home and you have this education under your belt, and all these people are either judging you or looking up to you or questioning you, and you're suddenly looking down at yourself, seeing all these differences. And I think in this book he really acknowledged what it was like being this other back home, being the long kind of lost son who now had all this education and experience. I find it so interesting how the fact that he was in a wheelchair was less otherizing than what he was wearing. Like, he talks so much about how his shoes looked, how his pants looked, how his shirt looked, and like that was something that was much more apparent, and his image and his degree, something that you can visually see on a person, like mattered so much now being with his family members. And he painted such beautiful and clear pictures of his family members, and it really showed the difference between him and them. And just, I think that was so interesting to me. I think just exploring the human mind and how things are not always what they seem, and there's so much more going on.